Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
DK, thanks a million for joining me today on a Friday. The whole idea of these little talks is that to find out what nuggets that everybody has learned on their journey, and specifically we like to talk about performance and what you believe, what that means to you, number one, and then what that means to you in terms of the players that you interact with on a regular basis. You've obviously been a great friend and mentor to mine over the years, so I've had the benefit of some of your wisdom over the last while, and I suppose the big thing for me is I want to share that wisdom with a few more people. Hopefully the 4 or 5 people that tune in, my mom, my dad, my brother, maybe somebody belonging to you might tune in as well.
Yeah, I'll watch it back as well.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I suppose, what does performance mean to you? Even just the word, and when you think of it, what resonates with you when you think of performance?
Yeah, I think for me, Donald, we were having a joke before we came on, but we were talking about Gene's effort at sourdough and my effort at sourdough. But performance is intent. I think it's broadened for me over the years. Performance, when I started to coach, was very much I think an on-course thing, or I was a swimmer when I was a kid, so it was in the pool thing, or I was a footballer as well. But like all of us kids growing up in the west of Ireland, I was a bit of everything. I used to be Zubizarreti, the Spanish keeper. That's who I was in the park because he was in the World Cup and I wanted to be him. And performance was, you head into this place as a kid and you start seeing these images and pictures in your head of performance, whether it's on the World Cup stage, which it was for me, or going to the All-Ireland final, which it was for me at that point as well, the odd time that Mayo got in, or whether it was in the pool. And this was all performance. And I think what it does then is it casts a self too in your mind of what performance is when you see somebody performing and you want to be that person performing. And I suppose, 40 odd years later, it's landed as intent and as presence and purposefulness in terms of when you're in that piece and that position where you are charged with a task, with, in our case as golfers, a practice session, a tournament, a gym session, a call with your coach, analyzing your statistics. They're all performances. And I think that's the broadest sense of the word for me, is that if we could manage to think of everything as a performance, as opposed to just the actual game, I think things would become more even. And then, you'd really enjoy the intent of actually performing in whatever sector it was of your preparation. The gap between preparation and play phase for me has narrowed over the years, to that effect, where, it's like if we have I was lucky enough to be with you in the States last year. We were doing a very interesting drill, which I was trying to learn from. My knowledge of putting is not as broad as yours, but it's not bad. But I really found it interesting. And as a high performance director, I felt my performance was to listen to you and try and pick up what you were trying to do, in the hope that I could see how it could help the girls perform. And the girls at that moment in time were performing really heavily in the task you were giving them. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's bringing it back to that space and that time, as opposed to looking at it as something that's out there.
Yeah.
Because out there never comes, actually.
Yeah. It's hard. I suppose when you break it down like that, and you go within every day and within every moment, there's an opportunity to perform in whatever context that might be. Yeah. But yet it's hard in sport sometimes, and we're lucky in our sport because we get to compete so often over the course of the year. Whereas it must be quite challenging, I would say, for your Olympic athletes or some of maybe your other sports where, you might only have, once every year, maybe once every 4 years, where you go into the arena that you're judged upon and all that kind of stuff. So what would be your take on those situations where within every day, within every moment, there's an opportunity to perform? But the hard thing with sports is the outside world, or whether you do that yourself, some moments seem to carry more weight than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a really good story on that one. We were at the HPX down in Tulfaris at the Performance Directors Conference, which was really good. Sport Ireland do a great job on that stuff. And David Gillick was speaking, the runner. And David's been a very successful runner. And he was talking about a situation in London. I remember the story very clearly. And he went out for his training, and his partner at the time, Charlotte, I think her name was, said to him, "What do you want for breakfast?" And he said, "Spanish omelette." And Spanish omelette is apparently X amount of sweet potato, X amount of all sorts of stuff that makes David perform as he would perform.
Yeah.
Didn't enjoy the run, came back in, and the Spanish omelette was something else, and he lost it. And I think that was a great lesson for me in terms of like these guys that have these 4-year cycles, is that Friday morning run in London and that omelette, which was the nutrient he needed after the run, that was every bit as important as a European final in many ways. And I think that's my take on it, is that, it's about educating ourselves to really understanding the journey as opposed to the alleged destination. We think we're, the impermanence of everything is incredible, and we think that we're heading towards, well, if I just get there, I'll be fine. But, as soon as we get there, there's actually something else, and we're not, it's this never-ending finishing line that we can never get there as humans.
Yeah.
I think it's taken me quite a few years to try to at least somewhat develop the skill, but to lean into and settle into whatever that is on a particular day is the joy of life, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it is, I have a friend of mine actually this week going through a horrific week, but we were talking last night about his ability to actually lean into the sadness a little bit and just say, this is actually part of the overall process. They had a very tragic situation, family situation. And to try to lean into that sadness and say, well, life is made up of a multitude of these different parts. And if I could be, present and aware for each part and almost see it for what it is. And I won't say enjoy it, Donald, but I would say lean into it.
Yeah.
That for me is performance. That for me is a daily, constant performing drive, as opposed to, right, I'm going to practice, I'm going to wait, I'm going to go on my phone, and then the event comes, and then all of a sudden my body feels completely different. I'm starting to really care what other people think, which is a nice idea, but there's actually no good to any of us.
Yeah.
Even our loved ones and our close ones, it doesn't matter, because we're actual independent humans in terms of how we operate. So, it's that, I think the piece that never comes is the piece I'd say, well, what are you actually preparing for? Because as you know, from this year and other years, we can plan for these things and we can get ready for these things, and all of a sudden they just don't happen. So where was all the blood, sweat and tears about?
And where do you sit on keeping a day-to-day focus, but having at least, should we have some sense of direction or path that we're on? We're kind of heading in this direction, and how should we? What's the best way to formulate, in your opinion, that set? Is it to to build a picture of the future? Is it to just have a general idea? Is it to be, to have an idea of where you want to go and come back to the moment? Or how would you suggest somebody who's involved in high performance sport sets their path?
Well, two things. First of all, I think that a lot of, with the brain science stuff we know now, a lot of people don't know what they want, even though they think they do. So I think that's a big question. From my own personal experience, I think when you can line up a certain amount of things that you're keen to achieve, your values, your interests, you can line them up and you can maybe journal them, as I know you do, and write them down and say, right, this is generally where I'm heading. And we call that an aspirational goal. And then I would, a phrase I'm going to come up with originally this morning, I'm trying to think of the right words for it. I'd be aggressively passive in achieving that. So that would be a skill that I found over the last number of years, is the fact that I would do what I need to do on a daily basis, fairly aggressively. And when you're into the type of stuff I'm into and read the type of stuff I read, you could be mistaken for somebody who's incredibly passive. And I'm not at all. I'm actually very ambitious. I'm very aggressive in the whole thing that we do, but it's in a way that's full of acceptance, full of understanding, full of awareness, I suppose, and consciousness of the fact that what I do today, if I do a really good job on it, I often said to the pros when we were doing our training courses over in the UK, I often said that, when you go and you pop onto Donald Scott's YouTube channel and you do your education piece, or you get some time with Chris or Johnny or one of the guys we work with, you spend your time, your money going to see them. If they're good enough, they don't charge you. So brilliant, at least you don't lose money from the process. But there'll come a time at some point where you'll write the invoice for the knowledge that you've gained there. And it's the same for a player. That if a player puts the construct into a weekend's work, Friday is gym work in the morning, short game work, good lunch, maybe a nap, really good session with their coach in the afternoon, and 9 holes performance play in the evening time. I mean, essentially when you go to bed at night, unlike building a wall, you get nothing for that. You just, there's no change of anything. Mm-hmm. But when you get onto the world stage, and when you get to your maybe like Leona and Steph and hopefully Olivia in the next couple of years, you get to that point where you've got that first chance to win that LPGA event. and it's $225,000, wherever the money is, wherever the points are. $4,000 of that was for when you were 13. 7,000 was for when you were 15.
Yeah.
It's not all the weekend's work. And I look at things the likes of the stuff that you and I do as that. The intentful conversation, the ability to be around somebody when they're struggling a little bit, the work. I think Katie Byron calls it the work. And that's the interesting thing about it. The interesting about it is not the alleged, like when Shane picked up the Claret Jug last year, everyone all around the world who have been following Shane's career sees this really affable, lovely Irish guy winning the Open. Isn't it a great story? It is, but it's a story checkered with difficulties and questions and tears and cars and Carnoustie, and it's all part of the journey. So if we could look at it more, I like doing this, I enjoy doing this, I feel purpose in doing this, I feel like I'm kind of expressing myself, I feel safe and warm and comfortable on a golf course, I enjoy the challenge of the game, I like interacting with my coaches, I like the improvement cycle. And if we could look at it like that, and if we were not ambitiously aggressive in what the result might be, but we're acceptant of what the result might be, it might be great. So it might be the difference between two words I talk about quite a bit, and that would be kind of apathy and acceptance.
Uh-huh.
And apathy for me is, sure, look, it's just Donald. I'll see you when I see you, and we'll have a lesson, and it'll be what it'll be. Sure, listen, it's all great. We're all going the same place. We're all going into a grave anyway. And acceptance is, no, I'll meet you at 2, I'll be on time, you'll be on time, we'll keep going, and we'll accept what happens at the end of the idea. And I think people and players and performers generally tend to surround themselves with people who match the way they see the world and match the way they think. And generally speaking, and it's not always with young kids because of our brain development. I was watching a MasterChef last night, an old repeat, and the guy dedicated a dish to 2 chefs that basically took him out of prison when he was 16, 17. And he's 28, 29 now. And he still remembers that, and he saw that.
Mm.
So like the guys from a performance perspective, the 2 guys that did that for him, a Greek Cypriot man, and I can't remember who the other guy was from, they didn't do that because they thought that he'd be a great chef working at their restaurant in the 4 years' time. They did it because it was the right thing to do, and it was a great path for a young man. So yeah, it's about filling those days, and I think to answer directly your question is to say, I kind of like the idea of this. I kind of feel safe working in this space. I was walking the pier with one of our female athletes during the week, and it was kind of like, I see myself working outdoors. That's great, lovely. Now back to what we're doing today. What are we doing today? Well, I'm doing a degree in accounting, and I'm looking for a apprenticeship in the accountant's office in Dublin. Well, that's not matching what you're saying.
Yeah.
Another guy did some of DiMartini's work for me. Really, really good pal of mine. Really great kid, and talked about what he wanted to do, and a lot of stuff was coming up about sports sponsorship and about, I need to get involved in the corporate world. And then he did his Martini's 13 questions on vision and direction. And the guy is a healthcare stroke nutritional stroke strength and conditioning professional. It's written on the page in front of him, but he's heading into sponsorship because he thinks that's maybe where the money might be for him. So I think that's our purpose there sometimes, is to kind of sit in with people. And I think one of the successes probably of our program that you've been involved with for so long has been that we've had so few people turning pro, because so few people are built for that life. So few people are competitive enough, individual enough, aggressive enough. Like, it's high performance sport at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think that people can be involved in a panel growing up and going through their teenage years. But I don't think from a performance perspective, I don't think it's not a result and it's failure if you don't make it as a pro. Because if you've been in a good system with good people around you, the lessons you've got on the way up as you go through your teenage years should be incredibly balanced and incredibly useful in whatever line of work you go into. And most importantly, incredibly useful with your family, your loved ones, and your friends. So basically, the result of that is that, how many players are on tour? Well, the fewer the better, because you and I know who should be on tour, because basically we see mini tour players all the time. And then we see some other girls who are very, very good at golf, but also very good at a lot of other things. And we need to encourage people to make sure that performance, there's no kind of binary, did he make it? Did she make it?
Yeah.
That doesn't operate for me.
It's funny, you said something there that's like, I think is so true, is you're already there. It's just kind of like if you take it that all the work you're doing right now is the stuff that will you'll apply in those moments. Like if you do your short game session today, that bit of work could be a part of the performance when it comes to you might win a major or win a championship or whatever. Like the performance of the day isn't isolated from all the work that goes before it, if that makes sense.
I'm guessing I've thought about this so much. I'm guessing it's 8% of it.
Yeah.
I'm guessing the other 92% of that has been chipped away at for a number of years.
Yeah.
Wow, look at that. Look at the paper. Look at that. $375 for a weekend's work. No. It wasn't. It was actually the invoices that went in for the last 20 years. The guy just got his stuff together and paid the invoices.
Yeah.
Really.
And
You go into the type of work, let's say, for example, your day fee. You go off and you do some work for somebody and this, God, that's really expensive for a day. It's not a day.
Yeah, it's like if somebody could carry that attitude, I would imagine it would allow them to let it happen a little bit more. Is like you're already a major champion by the virtue of the work you've done over the last 10 years. Now it's your chance to let it happen because you've paid your dues. Whereas, and I think that goes back to that striving piece that we've talked before, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that. It's like I think we're like, I see a lot of like, I get into that. I'm like really trying to climb and grab and, get ahead. Whereas sitting with it and letting it happen, that could be, how to put it, an easier way and a more enjoyable way to, live the life you want to live. Or what's your take on striving and that's
I think
the grind and crush it that we have, these kind of words that we have surrounded high performance sport.
Smashed it,
yeah.
Because I think for me, it's really back to that piece about that kind of, that apathy acceptance piece. It's really about, kind of this kind of indifference. Well, if you look at it, it's not that. It's the acceptance and the understanding before you understand the rules of the game that this could take this length of time to do it. And in between, you've got to go through all these checklists yourself. Doug McCluggage, the centered skier, I get a quote in my book: certain things are caused and certain things are allowed. Problems arise when we try to cause what should be allowed.
Very
right?
Good, yeah.
So two massive mistakes I've made personally in my life, right? Just the two biggest ones were when I actually didn't wait for something that was just naturally going to happen. And golf is a lot like that. When I kind of, Johnny Murtagh, the great jockey, don't push the river. The river's going to flow, and it's this ability to be able to realize where you're at and sit into it and say, regardless of what happens here. And that's why we see so much panic amongst parents and teenagers because, basically it's not working out and there's a change of coach or there's a change of club because it's not happening on that path, that linear path. And it's really dangerous. So I think what mentorship is for me is around that space of saying to somebody, look, there's a growth spurt going on here. Look, you're doing exams this year. Look, this isn't your time. It's just not where it needs to be right now. And the ability to be able to, I think Neil was telling me this morning that Shane said a lot about that on his chat to the guys on Wednesday, that it was, he wasn't a superstar when he was a boy. He was just looking for very small wins. So the bottom line is that if we go into this without knowing the rules of the game, and the rules of the game are hugely important, and that's not how to drop it or where to drop it. The rules of the game is this could take any amount of time to get how good, I don't know. Now, those are two hard rules to go into on day one. So if you don't understand those rules, it's not like other sports that it could take any amount of time to get how good, I don't know. And if you're in it for the reason of that, you're in it for the wrong reason. The reasons to be in it are perfection of craft, enjoyment of the game, challenge, etc., etc. And so it's about having this aspiration. I'd like to do this, and I'd like to do this most days. How can I factor and work something into my life? How I would do this, but not at the cost of saying, right, this is a binary situation. I'm either going to win it or not win it, because then you have to figure out your own level. I think when we look at players like, when you look at players like Shane, and you look at was he very? I remember Shane when he was 15. Was he very good? Yes, he was. Was he a definite British Open champion? No, for sure. Mm-hmm. So the bottom line is, Donald, when we go back to things like impermanence, let's add in uncertainty, because we don't know. And the minute we say we don't know, we're in good shape. I don't know actually, but here's what I'm going to do today.
Yeah.
I don't know, but here's what I'm going to do this morning.
And on the, I suppose another one that comes up a lot is like the balance piece. And people see, guys like Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods, and your Cristiano Ronaldo's, and these guys, and it seems like they have this like single-minded tunnel vision focus on success, and sometimes it can leave a lot of like casualties in its wake and their drive to the top. Do you think it's possible to be the very best at what you do and still have a balanced life, or still be still have a good family life and all that kind of stuff? Where do you stand on balance? Because it is tough to achieve balance in high performance sport.
Very, very difficult. I mean, you probably look at a guy that I just can't get my head around at all is Roger Federer. It all appears to be singing and dancing from the outside looking in. I don't know how that guy's managing it. Like I don't think that guy's ever missed paying a speeding fine or anything. So I'll tell you what it is, and it's something that I would use it, and it's a coaching technique. Hopefully, if there is one or two coaches watching it, it's something I've used in the past. Haven't used it for a while, but you've sprung something into my brain there. It's and even when we started learning a little bit about the different types of practice and the fact that you didn't have to be a ball beater, and the fact that, okay, we can approach the gym differently, or how do you understand nutrition, or what's the intensity level of your practice. So one of the things I do with players right now when I talk to them a little bit is I would say, just go forward a little bit. Most kids especially either go forward or go back, mainly go forward, very rarely go back, but they're not in the present at all. But I just allow them to go forward a little bit in my head, and I say, pretend you're at your club, you're at Buncrana Golf Club, right? Pretend it's 10 years' time and you're doing a clinic like Padraig would do for the members of Stackstown if he was back after he won the Open, or Shane was in Clara, or whatever the case may be. And tell the guys listening how you did it. Tell them your story. Because one thing's for sure, if you go through all of those stories and the amount of autobiographies we've read for sure, if you go through all of those stories, they all have one thing in common. They're totally different. They're totally different. And then what you see is along the way, you see incredible challenge. Like with Jordan, you see the challenge of what happened to his dad. I don't know if that's in the Netflix thing. I haven't got that far yet, but I did read some stuff on him years ago. You go through Tiger stuff. You go through anybody's stuff. And nobody gets out alive without some form of adversity. So the resilient piece, to be able to be against that and to be able to learn, like I would teach resilience before I would teach math if I was a school teacher, because I think that's something we need and we don't have enough of. We need to be able to figure out that the base point where we start from here is one of, this is going to be difficult. There's actually a lot of crap coming my way. So the trick is not to avoid it and push it away. The trick is to lean into it and understand how to manage it. So to answer your question, I'd probably love watching those. I find them kind of, how would I say, reading Tiger's book, watching Michael Jordan's program, watching Shane's thing. I love the human interest piece. But first thing I would say is that the authenticity of an individual human and how they manage to do it. I mean, the next person coming up, their story is completely different. And in fact, they're probably the only person that has a grasp of their story. So I'd call for authenticity. I would call for, we've had players along the way who've had huge value on, been very good to people around them. And then we've had players who've been focused completely on themselves.
Yeah.
And I think when I was maybe, I was going to say your age, but I'd say 10 years ago that bothered me because I thought there was a way you should be. But then I realized that's my journey, not theirs. So basically, own your own journey and be individual and be authentic, and make sure that when you're giving that speech in your golf club in 10 years' time about how you won your first major, that it's authentic because it's your journey.
It's funny, I don't know if you'll get to this point in the Michael Jordan documentary, but basically he speaks about his dad and stuff, but he doesn't cry or he doesn't tear up. But when he does tear up, is he's given an iPad and he needs to look on it, and he has to watch some of his teammates describe him.
Yeah. And
they describe him all like, he was a bit of an asshole, and he wasn't a nice guy to be around. Yeah, we didn't like him, blah, 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 blah. And he gives this, like, he talks about it, and he was like, but he breaks down at the end.
Yeah.
And he says break, as in like, I need a minute. And that really took me back. I was like, speaking about his dad, he was able to speak about the pain of it and everything, but he never broke down.
Mhm.
But watching his teammates, who he felt he said, I wasn't just doing it for me, I was doing it for them. I wanted them to
Mhm.
experience winning as well, and see them speak, negatively of him or not in the nicest light. He completely broke down, and I think he's probably had somebody help him deal with the trauma of losing his dad. But I don't, I wonder sometimes, do we prepare, as you said, do we develop the resiliency, or do we prepare for some of the trauma that
Mhm.
the highest level of sport can bring?
And I mean, if I finished that book, Bessel van der Kolk's book, the Body Keeps the Score, which is an incredible piece of work, and it's all about trauma and past traumas, and it's really interesting. But an interesting point on that, and when he sees with his teammates, and you go through this situation, and a book I think I was doing the rounds a couple of years ago, and it's a book I think, and I was quiet, I didn't say much about it, but I think I'm the only person that didn't enjoy some of it that much, was the James Kerr book, the Legacy piece.
Mm.
And it got me thinking around about that time, and the All Blacks at the time had a no dickheads policy, I think it was, for their team, and everyone got on the back of that, and everyone talked about that, and it was like, I kind of really challenged that in my own head, because as a coach then, that's me saying that person is a dickhead, but actually I'm not accepting them for what their journey is and what they're doing. Okay, if they're disruptive, and if they're causing a problem for a group that are trying to move in a direction together, that's fine. But I don't know if that's been a dickhead. I would say that's more kind of, listen, can we talk about how you can sit in here and do your job in the team? Or so I think to go back to legacy pieces like Jordan's and what he's done, I think what you'll find is going back through that program, and I was in the States back in the 90s. I was lucky enough to see him play once. And I was a big basketball fan at the time. 94, I saw him play at Golden State when I worked in San Francisco. And the big thing about his journey on the way through is that it's quintessentially Jordan. And apparently from the stories you hear about his golf now and different bits and pieces. But there's a guy that really, I don't know, but he just looks like he's lived his life, and it's not lived somebody else's life. And whether that's been portrayed as X, Y, or Z, well, then we just sit back, we watch and go, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And
like when you think about, say, the highs and the lows of, and I know you've done a bit of work like on helping people like outside of the sports world as well. Is like, are the losses and stuff that the players suffer, or experience, probably is a better word than suffer, as they go through their career, like, do you reckon it has like a level there is a level of trauma to those experiences? And do we are we as coaches, do we know are we taught well how to deal with those scenarios? Like, is there some protocols that you would recommend? Like, some of the toughest times I know I've experienced is either at a tournament with a player who's had a really tough day, or after a tough tournament is actually deconstructing that and stuff. So do we pay them the due diligence and respect that maybe they deserve, or what's your take on that?
Depends on your baseline, depends on your nurturing, I believe. And the reason I would say that I'll quote Woods on this one again would be Parnevik won in Charlotte back in the day, and they had a party to celebrate the win. And Tiger said to Elin that they don't do parties to celebrate W's. W's is what are expected.
Yeah.
And you go to a European Tour event, and back in the day, believe it or not, there used to be no results on the internet, so you used to have to get the results off the paper.
Right.
Man, imagine half the crowd that are listening to this.
Teletext.
Two of the four that are listening to this will be going, Jesus, what happened there? Teletext, yeah. So what we do is, and I am answering your question, but I'll just give you a different view on it. What we used to do in St. Margaret's with the guys, we used to cut out the back paper and see who missed the cut on a Saturday, because training was always Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
And then what we did is we folded that and we put it in an envelope. Right. And then 4 months later, when they came for the session after Christmas, we'd take out the piece of paper, and somebody who had missed the cut had won.
Very good, yeah.
Between now and then. So that's our game, because our game is 3-5% win rate if you're very, very good, whereas football might be 90%. So you look at, there's two things here. There's that relative nurture when you're coming up to winning at all costs, competing, perfecting craft, making a living, making cuts. The one thing we have to understand about all of this, right, is that it's all complete nonsense. If we do that, if that's our baseline, we're in good shape, right? It's absolutely Brené Brown, the story I'm telling myself today is, it's all rubbish, right? Now, once we get to that space, we're going, okay, so now what I have is I have a 172 uphill into the breeze. I'm going to punch a 4-iron in here. Pin is short right. I'm going to go back left because I have a downhill. No, it's not that fast. Perfect. Let's get the average to get the ball in the hole from 172. You'd be quicker at this than I would, but I'm sure it's what, 3 point.
It'd be 3 point something, yeah.
Yeah. So therefore, the ability to compute and get into that moment and generate the thoughts required to hit a shot are actually present and valuable instincts and training.
Yeah.
The ability to go into the clubhouse afterwards and have blown a 5-shot lead or have won by 5 shots and to decide to tell yourself whatever story you want to tell yourself, absolutely useless. Off you go. But
Yeah.
I won't be listening, because basically what happens is that reflection is excellent, but reflection needs to be accurate and needs to be based on process, not on what your thought pattern. And I think that's one thing going back on that, is that if you could do something for kids now, not just in golf, but in all sports, but if you could truly get a 13 to 18-year-old kid to understand that they're not their thoughts, and to understand between the actualization of self, if there is a self, versus the stuff that goes through your head every day, that delineation would be a remarkable help. It'd be more helpful than the new ping driver. And I like ping clubs, by the way. It'd be more helpful than the new Odyssey putter.
Yeah.
But if they could figure out that, you know what, and again, going back to that point, it's not being indifferent, it's being actual. That's the facts.
Yeah.
Right? That's the facts are, I can paint this baby up whatever way I want to go. Gosh, you know, I had 3-shot lead and I let it go over the last 6 holes. Hold on a second. I'm playing an LPGA event. Cripes, if I told myself 2 years ago I was on the LPGA, I'd have been delighted. Nah, but hold on. You made a bad decision. You can decide to roll this whatever way you want. And that's where people like you come in, that you're able and you have the experience to be able to reflect with somebody and get them to understand the context of it. And again, spoiler warning, that is not that we're apathetic. None of this is apathy. None of this is, sure, look at, that's the way the cookie crumbles. It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with understanding the fact that if you play this game that is not linear, things happen, and you just have to make sure you understand what I would call the relative context of what this game is all about and what sport is all about.
It's funny you said what you said there. I know you've said it a lot. Shane spoke about his US Open experience at Oakmount, and he had a 4-shot lead, and he said that if he could do anything in his career where he could go back, he would go back to I think he said the 14th fairway, or maybe even the 14th fairway, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I was tied for the lead in the US Open and I was convinced I'd lost the tournament.
I know.
It goes to that, you know, the story you tell yourself is he told himself he was tied for the lead in the US Open, because he had lost the 4-shot lead. He was still leading, but he had told himself he had lost the tournament, and he went on to not win or whatever. So when you speak to, you know, the story I tell myself today is, have you any like guidelines or any insights that you would give anybody relative to that? How do you go about generating that story? Do you generate a story at all? What's your thoughts on that?
I've done quite a few pieces on this outside of golf with groups, and I've got a couple of people on my phone at the minute who are really challenged with this. So you know, and you actually checked me on this a couple of years ago, and you were dead right about this. I said something to you kind of offhand about social media, and you said, well, Dave, actually some people really enjoy social media. And I said, Donald, you're right, actually. David, don't be so judgmental. Thank you. But what I choose to do for my purpose and my feeling is that I choose to have probably fewer people, but it's a lot of one-on-one stuff. And hopefully it's really quick responses to the people I'm discussing things with. And I have 2 people at the moment that are trying to go through this ability to understand the difference between the fact that, look, I'm all over the place, versus I'm actually in control of my thoughts to a larger degree than I thought I was. And even back in the day, they didn't think that was possible after a certain age. But with neuroplasticity and the way the brain works and how much they're understanding about that, that's possible right up to a ripe old age. No panic with that at all. So what I would do is I would, any players, any coaches at all that struggle with this stuff of like, we're sitting into a Friday now and I've got some stuff to do. I've got some stuff in my email inbox, maybe not much. Got a couple of plans, got a couple of things to do, got to get the family organized. I do most of the food and beverage in this house, although it's been heavily critiqued over the last few weeks. It's like a restaurant in here some evenings. So I've got my responsibilities, a few things to do, and I'm just going to get involved in doing those things. And my worries about the future, my worries about job opportunities, finances, all that kind of stuff is at a point with me now where it's completely parked, because I know eventually that there's no point in having that conversation. I know there's no point thinking, well, what happens if we don't play in the Europeans? What happens if we don't need to get the coaches back out there? What happens if Carton is not open? I mean, nothing I can do about that now, but that's taken a long time to get me to that point, because I would have been reasonably anxious in my 20s, etc. So I think my answer to that is that it's not a throwaway remark. It's about somebody saying, as a person, you know, and I'm sure I have friends that are absolutely looking at me thinking they get this. They never had a default position of anxiety. They were always just kind of, no, I completely understand the relative and the ultimate views of life. I understand how life works perfectly. What do you mean you're answering emails on a Saturday night? It'll wait until Tuesday. Like, that'd keep me awake at night if I thought I didn't get back to somebody, right?
Yeah.
So I know I need to clear that up to get myself into a headspace where I can read, I can spend time with my daughter, my wife, and I can do whatever I need to do, go for a swim in the sea. So my answer to you is, if anyone is in that space, and I think that's what happens in terms of culturally, we're getting a little bit more comfortable with this. But if any of our students are in a space where they're kind of going, do you know what, Dave, I just can't make sense of the whole thing. Well, let's just take some time. And let's have our golf lessons or have our chats, but let's spend some time and actually try to understand how this works. And it's funny, even by understanding that, oh my gosh, I won't be able to pay the electricity bill next month, comes in and eventually leaves. Even by understanding that that's a human trait, you can say, okay, it's much easier to handle it. But for some reason, oh my God, my game is so bad, all of a sudden doesn't come out and stays as the truth.
Yes.
And that's the difficulty I think that a lot of people have, is the ability to control thoughts, feelings, and emotions instead of the actual facts of the matter. And we often see that with people with, you know, you could be on a bus or you could be having a walk or something, you see people and we see the actuality of the person. We have no idea what state they're in. And that always interests me in airports, people watching, you see a guy in a great suit and walking down on the phone, very busy talking about a big deal. We don't know Donald. He could be in the horrors in some other spaces. We don't know. So I suppose it's a shout out to all the players to kind of not separate mental health and golf, but to see it as kind of the same thing and to see it as their life. And golf is just their chosen sport, but it's the person that we're looking at. And are you okay with everything? And can you feel, are your feelings good? And do you understand how life works? Do you understand that you're not in control of everything? Do you understand that the bits you are in control of are tough enough? Do you understand that it's very, Franklin D. Roosevelt, learn how hard it is to change yourself and then stop giving the advice out on how somebody else should change what they do. So it's difficult enough, but I think the relative rules of how brain science works and how mental health works, I think have a massive connection with how golf is played.
Like, I remember one of the first things that I was getting a bit of help, like, and they do through like CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, is like somebody walks past you in the street and they don't say hello to you, and you automatically think, what did I do to annoy that person? They're really pissed off at me. That was so mean, and I couldn't have done something that bad. But maybe that person had a really bad day. Maybe they lost someone. Maybe they were going through so much pain they didn't even see, they didn't even notice.
Yeah.
And they force you to challenge, look at like different scenarios in many different ways. And I think, you know, I suppose one of the helpful things would be that I got like from chatting over the years is like, there's always multiple ways to look at any given situation, or multiple stories you can tell yourself. And and if you can be flexible, in that story, it'll help you, I suppose. It's helped me certainly get to the true understanding of the situation, as opposed to getting stuck on that initial like thought or story that comes into your head. And
big time.
And like, at what stage, or is that just like, if you were helping a player now, and they're coming up and they're like a real good 16, 17-year-old, and they've got like maybe like a little bit of expectation from mom and dad, and they've got like, they're starting to get, recognized in bits and pieces. Is that just a conversational piece as a coach of like always like chatting to the player and guiding them and asking them questions to help them see things in different ways, or is there a formal process in going about that?
No, I think it's connection. It's like, just back to the first point, the DNA. You see, the interesting thing about it is there's a trade-off here. When your skills were being dished out on that great day that they launched you into the world all those years ago, the very reason that made you, probably in terms of your right brain, left brain cabling, your DNA, the very reason that made you a little fragile, that made me a little bit fragile, right? Could be the very reason why you're so good with people. Could be the very reason why you care so much about people. That's just your DNA. That's the way we're kind of built, whereas somebody else might be stronger themselves, but then maybe not as strong as you, somebody like you would be with people, for example. So I think that's the first point on that. And that really is a grading from that type of DNA right up to, actually, there's only me. That's it. It's nobody else really. I couldn't care less, I think what happens with me, the traditional role, if you look at a role of a coach, so, I think there's a huge amount of bacterial connection within coaching. When we go back to a performance space, I think the connection between two human beings is something that we haven't looked into enough, in terms of like, I had a guy, we went for a swim yesterday, and one of my students, he is not playing at the moment, actually. He's 23 and I'm 48, and we sit down and we talk about all sorts. Why? I cannot explain that to you at all. It's just, there's a connection there. And then you go through some other situations where you look at, you see the boy or the girl, you talk, you listen, and sometimes another student I had said, wow, that's interesting, I'd never talked to my dad about this. And when I look back and think, wow, that's interesting, but actually I look back and I wouldn't have thought to talk to my dad about, and my dad and I are like this, and I wouldn't have talked to him about a lot of this stuff. So I think sometimes when you can outsource that to somebody who you feel is private, maybe experienced in the situation, independent, and maybe then that's their role. That's that's their role in your progression. And you go back and you look at, well, Donald really helped me in that space. It's really solid. My dad was there for something else. My dad was there, but Donald helped me make sense of maybe where dad was coming from as well. So it's almost kind of an independent arbitrator in the middle of the two of them, and that's where the coach sits in, and the coach's role might be. I think that type of thing, to make sure the player's okay, comes a little bit later, after the initial swing analysis, performance analysis. And I think that's when you get to where somebody like Neil and Shane are now, where the bond is, it's terrifically established over 20 years, that it's a very strong relationship in terms of making sure that each other's probably okay. And Shane and Neil probably positioned that for the first 2 years, that he was just making sure Shane was okay, because that's what Neil does for all the players. So yeah, it's a really interesting one. So it's becoming more, from a performance perspective, I mean, with the internet, with the data available, like, whereas when I was taking up coaching and I had some video analysis equipment, I was the only one to have it, like, and it was a complete USP. And as we go through it now, and as we go through the different cycles of coaching, your own ability to see what the USP is actually just a story in your head, but it gives you authenticity in your work. Gotcha. And then it says to you something we talked about earlier on. Do you know what? I don't have to coach everybody in the world, but I've got a lovely link with these 5 or 6 people. And I know we had another conversation about this in previous weeks, but like, I don't mean to be funny with this, but I don't think that we should go down the road and say, wouldn't it be lovely to coach that player if they came to me for help? Because I used to think that when I was in my 20s. Imagine if I just got Justin Rose now, I'd be fine, wouldn't I? But in order to get to that point, there has to be a relationship that, for me, has to be just as beneficial to the coach as it is to the player at that point.
And I suppose the last one I'll ask you would be, and it's the thing you suggested to the players. You suggested them to go forward, and I'm going to suggest you to go back. If you were sat in front of a young 14-year-old DK, what insights would you pass on to him, or what?
Very quickly, if I could get a 40-year-old to understand things are ephemeral, impermanent. I could set up an office in Dublin. I could sit there all day. If I could, I'd make a fortune, right? If I could get a 14-year-old to understand that this too shall pass. This is a train passing through your head. This is a perception of where this is not important. That would be it. I would actually do that for the rest of my life, because when you know it and I know it, and it actually doesn't get any, it doesn't go away, but it gets much better. Is like, and even if I know you work with some of the girls on tour, a couple of the guys on tour, but even if at 28 or 26, they could sit in an airport on the way home from missing a cut after shooting 78, 76, and realize that they're more in control of their mood than they know, and realize that this is part of the deal, and realize that this actually in a few years' time won't even be in their memory.
Yeah.
So from trauma, I think trauma sometimes comes from things like holding on to those things for too long and been hurt for too long. So that's what I would do to the 40-year-old. I'd say, Dave, put your 2 feet on the floor, give it a lash today, do your best for everyone around you, because I value that. And then you know what? That's it. That's all you can do. And funny enough, you keep doing good work and you keep doing good things, it adds up to something as you go through life, but it never adds up to one thing, because that's a finish line, and we never hit that finish line. Never.
That's brilliant. And then I suppose the final thing would be, a lot of the stuff we talked about today would be is kind of conversational in tone. It's like understandings and all that kind of stuff. If any, like, say, young players, even young coaches or old coaches or anybody who's watching this, any, like, I suppose, tools or any suggestions for them as to how they could work on these principles, or how they could take these things into their own lives in a practical, like, practice way, or is it just something that you have to?
It's like your very first entrance into this space would be in, I suppose, what's hundreds of years old, but it's just getting into the natural sphere of life now, would be mindfulness, would be meditative practices, etc. And the problem with that is that if you go into that at beginner's level, so in other words, if you start looking at that as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, you'll get really spooked. It's like, because it's like, well, so what am I sitting there on a stool for and just breathing for? Like, what's that about? But it's the context about being able to get somebody to understand, when even if you were able to do it through the point of when you see a player coming under pressure on the course, taking a few deep breaths. Well, if you start the conversation on what the breath is, well, hold on, the breath is my only actual single identifier of the fact that I'm here, right? My breath now is the actual cue for presence. So it's basically, it goes back to, well, why would you take a deep breath? Well, because you're nervous, but you're nervous because something that hasn't played out yet has to play out. So I've been kind to replace nerves with curiosity. Wow, let's see how this one plays out. Let's be here, let's be involved, let's show up, and let's see what happens, as opposed to this needs to happen. So it's funny, now that you mentioned that, I think that's something really interesting. For once, on a podcast or on a chat, I actually wouldn't recommend a book, right? I would recommend anyone at all that, just like, if you can think about it, I might be this way with numbers, actually. My wife's dyslexic, so we've talked about dyslexia quite a bit in this house over the years. I wouldn't be great with numbers and spreadsheets and Excels and all that. To look at them now, it's looking like the front page of the Moscow Tribune. I don't really get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you're a young player and you don't get this, and if your mind causes you a little bit of anxiety and your mood swing quite a bit, I would not go for 4 lessons with Donald Scott. I would go for 2 lessons with Donald Scott, and then I would go for 2 lessons with the person that Donald Scott recommends to go to. And I would say that your performance from your sport and from your life, with all due respect to Donald Scott's coaching, would be so much better after those 4 sessions, because what you're doing is you're taking a really valuable piece and you're able to say, I really begin into the stuff Donald's talking about, start line, slopes, angles. I get it. It's fantastic. Oh, this guy, I'm starting to understand how she works a little bit. Okay, interesting. So, like, I'm a slow learner, but like, for me to do what I'm doing with you now in the evening time, it wouldn't be any good, Donald. I'm done.
Mm,
But I'm good in the mornings because I understand how this works now.
gotcha.
You know, and I think that our ability, and it's not sports psychology, it's more clinical psychology. Like sports psychology, Leandra's brilliant work for us, but that's all preparatory stuff at 16s and under to get guys into a point of getting their stuff together and kind of saying, let's go, what does this mean? And all like starting to defrag the whole thing. But I really wish at school, we had a class that people could go in to understand how their minds worked and to understand that not as a throwaway remark, but to really understand that, you know, I flipped out with Alex here a few weeks ago for the first time in a long time because we thought a friend came over and a cooler friend came along and the friend was dumped, kind of.
All right, okay.
And I'll tell you what, the shit hit the fan here. And she defended it and she backed it off, and I'm not sure, but I'll tell you what, it's not going to happen again. And that stuff happens every single day, and that leaves an effect on the other kid unless we can explain to the other kid, look, this is what's happening. So I remember that movie I watched, Inside Out. I think it was a cartoon movie about the brain.
Yeah.
I watched it with Alex a couple of years ago. So I'd say that's my kind of passion at the moment within golf and within the players we choose to help and try to help. And even with some of their parents is to try to understand, like, these thoughts are just thoughts and actually at the moment they're not helpful. And just because some other parent is judging or deciding that, you know, we're not on course for high performance, whatever that might be, doesn't mean you have to. So I'd be lucky enough over the years to have some really good, strong conversations with some parents around this space. And that's not to say that I'm parent of the year. I have my own challenges with my own daughter. But from the outside looking in, that would be my piece. I'd say if you were one of your students, one of any of our students, and they didn't make sense of this, get somebody to help you make sense of it, even if it's a question of absolutely online. And the good news is, Donald, that I think that I can only speak for myself. I will do this for anybody for nothing. I will have a conversation with anybody for free. If somebody wants to talk about this stuff, I don't have all the answers. I'm not a qualified clinical psychologist, but I can start the conversation. And mostly, touch wood, most of the people I've talked to, they only needed the beginner's version. And once they got that, they could do the rest themselves. We don't need, unless in very severe cases when we need to refer, we don't need the absolute master's version, but just a beginner's version to know that performance is relative in terms of how we see ourselves and how we perform ourselves and how we think, but it's all relative to how we think. And the thinking is the underpin of the performance, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Oh, we won, I'll go and celebrate. Oh, I lost, I'm in bad mood. Like, that's not going to last for too long. That's going to end up in trouble at some point. And we must mitigate against that.
I think that's a lovely way to finish it. It's like the actionable piece is if there's like a way of, if you're thinking or how you feel or any of those things troubles you or you're not happy with it, it doesn't have to be that way, and you can work on it and you can understand it better and you can be curious about it and you can like find somebody to help you work on those things, and you can enjoy your sport and your life a little bit more and enjoy both ends of it a wee bit more.
Absolutely. It was like, I mean, one of the athletes that one of the girls I went for a walk with this week, I mean, her golf is pretty non-existent now, but I'll tell you what, is she in great shape compared to a few years ago when everything just got too much for her. Best player you ever coached question on a website, she might be the answer now, and she doesn't even play golf. Yeah. Because she used golf as a way to be able to kind of understand her life and understand her mind. And I think, you know, I don't think there's still a stigma around it, but I would say it's much easier to go for a TPI screening or a TrackMan session or a putting session than it is to go for a session to say, what's happening?
Dave, thanks a million. That was really, really good, and I hope somebody gets a bit of value out of it. If not, I got loads of value out of it, so I'm happy enough.
And the 2 or 3 people that are going to watch it, it's like a private audience for them, you know.
Yeah. Thanks a million, Dave.
Good to talk, Donald. Take care.
Chat to you later.